The spotlight cut through the darkness like a blade, revealing a small figure standing alone on the grandest stage in America. Her dark skin seemed to absorb the harsh theater lights, while her white cane trembled slightly in her grip. 15-year-old Alma Weatherford couldn't see the 1,000 faces staring at her, but she could feel their judgment pressing against her chest like a weight. Then came the voice that would change everything. "Get that girl off my stage. She's going to damage a $100,000 piano." The words sliced through the silence with surgical precision. They came from Clovis Penmar, America's most celebrated classical pianist, a man whose face graced the covers of concert programs worldwide. His silver hair caught the stage lights as he stepped from the wings, his tailored tuxedo pristine, his expression carved from ice. "She's blind. She's different. This isn't a charity performance." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away in embarrassment, others nodded in silent agreement. But Alma didn't move. She stood there, her clouded eyes fixed on something beyond sight, her fingers tightening around the handle of her cane. What happened next would ignite a movement that would echo across continents and redefine what it means to truly hear music. This is the story of a girl who had nothing, no sight, no fame, no privilege, yet possessed the one thing that money couldn't buy: a soul that could speak through sound in ways that left the world breathless. 2 years earlier, on a gray October morning in Hartford, Connecticut, a beaten-up social services van pulled up to the iron gates of Eastbrook Conservatory, the most prestigious music academy in New England, where senators' children learned Mozart and CEOs' grandchildren mastered Chopin. 13-year-old Alma stepped out carrying everything she owned: a cardboard suitcase held together with duct tape, a cracked Braille reader, and the white cane that had been her companion since birth. She was part of something called the Silent Observer Program, a pilot initiative that sounded charitable on paper but felt like exile in practice. The marble hallways of Eastbrook gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Students in pressed uniforms hurried between classes, their expensive leather bags bouncing against their sides. Their conversations were peppered with words like Carnegie Hall debut and family connections at Lincoln Center. Alma wasn't allowed in those conversations. She wasn't allowed in the classrooms either. Instead, she spent her days sitting in hallway corners, pressing her ear against closed classroom doors. Through the gap beneath door 2B, she could hear Professor Floyd Beringer teaching harmonic analysis. She memorized every word, every musical example, every correction he made to privileged students who took their access for granted. The other students learned to step around her, like she was furniture. They never spoke to her, never acknowledged her presence. She was a ghost haunting the margins of their golden world. But Alma was learning. Oh, was she learning? She discovered that the wooden floors on the 3rd level resonated differently than those on the 2nd, better for bass notes. She could tell when Professor Beringer tapped the blackboard with his left hand versus his right. She knew which student would stumble on the 16th measures before they played a single note just by listening to their breathing patterns. Every night, alone in her cramped dormitory room designated for auxiliary students, Alma would replay the day's lessons in her mind. She'd trace imaginary piano keys on her thigh, conducting silent symphonies with her fingertips. The cruelty wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, systematic, and suffocating. Lucretia Boone, daughter of a Supreme Court justice, once whispered to her friends as Alma passed, "I heard they only let her in for the tax write-off." The girls giggled, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Maud Tilling, the dormitory supervisor, would often pull Alma aside with saccharine concern. "Dear, you need to understand your place here. Don't make the other students uncomfortable." Uncomfortable, as if Alma's very existence was an inconvenience to be managed. The rain drummed against the conservatory windows like fingers on piano keys. It was past midnight when Professor Floyd Beringer finished his evening lecture and found Alma still sitting outside his classroom. Her hands were moving in the air, conducting an invisible orchestra, her face serene with concentration. He watched her for 10 minutes before speaking. "What are you playing?" Alma startled, her hands freezing mid-gesture. I'm sorry, Professor. I didn't mean to disturb. You're playing the Rachmaninoff piece I taught today, but you're correcting the phrasing mistakes my students made." Floyd Beringer was 73 years old, with hands that had once graced the world's greatest stages. He'd retired from performing after a heart attack, choosing to teach because he believed music should be passed down like a sacred flame. He taught senators' children, ambassadors' grandchildren, and future Grammy winners. But he'd never encountered anyone like Alma. "Would you like to learn properly?" he asked. Those 6 words changed everything. Their lessons took place in secret, in a forgotten practice room in the conservatory's basement. The piano was old and slightly out of tune. The room smelled of dust and forgotten dreams, but to Alma, it was paradise. Floyd didn't teach with textbooks or rigid methods. He taught with stories. "A minor chord isn't just sad," he'd say, his weathered hands demonstrating on the keys. "It's when you realize someone you love will never come home. Feel that weight, let it live in your fingers." Alma absorbed everything like parched earth drinking rain. She didn't just learn music, she lived, breathed, and became it. After 3 months of secret lessons, Floyd made a decision that would terrify the conservatory's administration. He submitted Alma's name for the Young Virtuoso Showcase, the most prestigious student competition in the country. The audition notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Alma's dorm room like a diplomatic message. The letterhead was embossed with gold, the language formal and cold. "Miss Weatherford, you are invited to audition for the Young Virtuoso Showcase. Audition scheduled for 7:15 a.m., practice room C, basement level. Duration, 8 minutes maximum. 7:15 in the morning. In the basement, 8 minutes. 8 minutes. It was an insult disguised as an opportunity. Floyd found her sitting on her narrow dorm bed, the letter crumpled in her lap. "They don't want me to succeed," she whispered. "They don't want you to try," he corrected. "There's a difference." The morning of the audition, Alma woke before dawn. She sat by her window listening to the world wake up, birds chirping, distant traffic, the hum of the heating system. Each sound was a note in the symphony of her life. Practice room C was exactly what she expected, fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry insects, a piano that hadn't been tuned in months, one judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "State your name and piece," the judge said, without looking up from his clipboard. "Alma Weatherford, Rachmaninoff Prelude in G minor." She sat at the bench, placed her hands on the keys, and closed her eyes. Not because she was blind, she'd been doing that her whole life, but because she needed to block out everything else and listen to the music that lived inside her. What emerged wasn't just technique or memorized passages, it was pure emotion translated into sound. Each note carried the weight of every closed door, every whispered insult, every night she'd dreamed of belonging somewhere. But it also carried hope, fragile, desperate, beautiful hope. The last note faded into silence. The judge scribbled something on his paper and left without a word. But he wasn't the only one who heard her play. Oswald Merton had been Eastbrook's janitor for 23 years. He'd mopped floors where musical legends once walked, emptied trash cans filled with the discarded dreams of students who didn't make the cut. He wasn't a musician, but he knew the difference between playing notes and making music. When he heard Alma's audition through the thin basement walls, something compelled him to pull out his old smartphone and record the final 3 minutes of her performance. That night, sitting in his small apartment above a laundromat, Oswald uploaded the video to YouTube with a simple title, "Rejected Student Plays Rachmaninoff, This Will Break Your Heart." The video started slowly. A few dozen views from classical music forums, then 100, then 1,000. But by the third day, something extraordinary happened. A one-handed pianist from Argentina shared it, writing, "I haven't cried over music in 10 years. This girl made me remember why I fell in love with piano." A deaf composer from Tokyo felt the vibrations through her speakers and posted, "She doesn't need to see the keys to touch your soul. I don't need to hear perfectly to feel her pain." The video exploded across social media platforms, not because of algorithms or paid promotion, but because it carried something genuine in a world starved for authenticity. Within a week, it reached 5 million views. Music blogs started asking questions. Who is Alma Weatherford? Why was she rejected? What conservatory would turn away talent like this? Hey everyone, watching from around the world. I can feel your energy through the screen, and I know this story is touching hearts across continents. I'm curious. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from right now. Your hometown might be thousands of miles away from mine, but right now we're all connected by Alma's story. And hey, if this is moving you the way it's moving me, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Now back to our story, because what happens next will absolutely shock you. The phone call came on a Wednesday morning. Jared Whitman, artistic director of the International Harmony Gala, the most prestigious musical event in the world, was on the line. Miss Weatherford, we would like to invite you to open our annual gala. You'll be performing before an audience of world leaders, musical legends, and cultural luminaries. Alma sat in stunned silence. There's just one thing, Whitman continued. You'll be performing right before Clovis Penmar. I hope that's not a problem. Clovis Penmar, the man whose career was built on perfection, whose performances were surgical in their precision, the man who believed music belonged only to those born into privilege. It wasn't a coincidence. The organizers knew exactly what they were doing. The Lincoln Center Opera House buzzed with activity the day before the gala. Stagehands adjusted lighting rigs, sound engineers tested microphone levels, and performers ran through their pieces one final time. Alma walked onto the stage carrying her white cane and a small leather case containing her mother's wooden flute, the only thing she had left from her life before the orphanage. The Steinway grand piano sat center stage like a sleeping giant, its polished surface reflecting the theater lights. Alma approached it slowly, reverently, her fingertips barely grazing the keys. Careful with that instrument, girl. The voice cut through the theater like a whip crack. Clovis Penmar emerged from the wings, his expression twisted with disdain. At 62, he was still America's classical music royalty, with silver hair that caught the stage lights and eyes like chips of blue ice. That piano is worth more than most people's houses. I won't have some amateur damaging it with sloppy technique. The word amateurs dripped with venom. Stagehands stopped working. Sound engineers looked up from their equipment. The entire theater held its breath. Alma didn't respond. She simply sat at the piano bench, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. But this wasn't Rachmaninoff. This wasn't any composed piece at all. What flowed from her fingers was pure improvisation, a musical conversation between her soul and the universe. The melody spoke of loneliness, of dreams deferred, of doors slammed shut. But it also spoke of resilience, of hope that refused to die, of a spirit that couldn't be broken no matter how hard the world tried. The music filled every corner of the massive theater, seeming to make the very walls breathe with emotion. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Clovis Penmar stood frozen, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time in decades, he had heard something he couldn't replicate, couldn't buy, couldn't claim as his own. He had heard the truth. Gala night arrived with all the pomp and circumstance befitting an event that drew presidents, Nobel laureates, and Hollywood royalty. Red carpets unfurled like crimson rivers, photographers' flashes popped like fireworks, and the world's elite filled the opera house in their finest attire. Backstage, Alma sat quietly in a simple black dress, her mother's flute case resting on her lap. She could hear the murmur of the crowd, feel the electricity in the air, sense the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed through the theater. Please welcome our opening performer, Alma Weatherford. She walked onto the stage alone, her white cane tapping softly against the polished floor. The audience fell silent, not the reverent quiet reserved for established artists, but the uncomfortable hush that accompanies uncertainty. Alma sat at the piano, set her cane aside, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she sat perfectly still, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then she began to play. The piece she performed that night had no name, no composer credit, no place in any musical canon. It was the story of her life translated into sound, the loneliness of the orphanage, the rejection at Eastbrook, the secret lessons with Professor Beringer, the humiliation of the basement audition. But as the music progressed, something extraordinary happened. The individual experiences transformed into universal truths. Her pain became everyone's pain. Her hope became everyone's hope. Her triumph became everyone's triumph. The audience didn't just hear the music, they felt it in their bones, in their blood, in the deepest chambers of their hearts. A Supreme Court justice wiped tears from his eyes. A Fortune 500 CEO leaned forward in his seat, his corporate facade cracking. The First Lady clutched her husband's hand, both of them transported to places they'd forgotten existed. And Clovis Penmar, sitting in the wings waiting for his turn to perform, realized with crystalline clarity that everything he'd ever played was just noise compared to this symphony of the soul. When Alma lifted her hands from the keys, the silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, as if released from a spell, the audience erupted. Not polite applause but something primal and overwhelming, a recognition that they had witnessed something that would stay with them forever. The offers came immediately. Record labels waved multi-million-dollar contracts. Television producers pitched documentary deals. Concert promoters offered world tours that would make her rich beyond imagination. Alma turned them all down. Why? Reporters demanded. You could have everything: fame, fortune, recognition. She smiled, that same serene expression she'd worn while sitting outside locked classroom doors. I already have everything I need. I have music that comes from truth. What more could I want? Instead of embracing celebrity, Alma disappeared, but she didn't vanish entirely. Thank you for watching this. If it resonated with you, please like and comment to support more content like this. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next upload.